And good evening. Welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for the 5th legislative day of 2011. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up in tonight's program, a tougher immigration law is proposed in the House, requiring businesses to comply with the federal E-Verify program. We continue our series of leadership interviews with Senate President Pro Tem Tommy Williams. And we'll talk about education proposals for this year's session with Representative David Casas, Vice Chairman of the House Education Committee, and Marcus Downs, Government Relations Director with the Georgia Association of Educators. Important issues all coming up tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. And first, we go down to the Capitol and Mwandi Lawson for our Capitol report. Good evening, Mwandi.
Thanks so much, Scott. You know, the first of the immigration measures was introduced in the House today. Bill's sponsor, Representative Matt Ramsey, says the Joint House-Senate Committee on Illegal Immigration began examining that issue and holding public forums late last summer, so he feels confident that they've crafted a measure that's fair.
I'll hit the high points. My bill's about 18 sections long, so I'll try to hit some of the high points. Some of the key components of the bill. There's a mandatory requirement for all private employers to enroll in and participate in the federal E-Verify program. It verifies the citizenship and eligibility of its employees to work in the United States. We've got a provision strengthening the type of document that you will be required to show and that can be accepted by state and local governments for official purposes, including the dispensation of public benefits. We're going to make sure that only IDs that are secure and verifiable and issued by the state or federal governments can be used for official purposes in Georgia. We're creating several new criminal provisions. We're trying to get at the folks. A cottage industry has kind of popped up in Georgia, whereby individuals and groups are inducing illegal aliens to come here. They're helping to transport them and getting them here, and really almost selling their work to employers in some different industries. So we really want to get at the folks that are transporting and harboring and inducing illegal aliens come to the state. We've created some criminal code provisions around that. We've got a number of provisions in there to encourage and provide incentives to local governments to avail themselves of an attempt to participate in various federal programs that are available to local governments to help enforcing illegal immigration, including the 287G program and the Secure Communities Initiative. So those are some of the high points. It's a long bill. I expect to have a really good and spirited debate when it goes to committee in the next week or two, and we look forward to working through that process.
It goes without saying that the Ramsey proposal has opposition. The Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials, or GALEO, calls it Representative Ramsey's Arizona law, saying, fundamentally, this would be a jobs killer for Georgia. Number one, how is Representative Ramsey going to pay for any new enforcement scheme that he may come up with for his legislation? Georgia's budget is tight, and obviously there's going to be needed resources for any type of new enforcement actions by the state. Secondly, how can the state afford litigation that likely will arise because of this unconstitutional piece of legislation?
We've drafted the bill in a way that I think is constitutional. I'm not sure. I'm sure there. When we get to the end of the process and see what is in the bill, we're not going to put anything in there that we think runs afoul of the state or U.S. Constitution. But oftentimes, as you know, lawyers disagree, and there may be a lawyer in the Obama administration Justice Department that may not see it the way I do. I'm not going to try to predict whether the federal government's going to bring a lawsuit against us, but we think we've drafted a constitutional law that just has a whole host of common sense measures that's going to address this issue here in Georgia.
The GALEO statement goes on to say, the Georgia Farm Bureau has weighed in and said that any kind of efforts by the state to regulate immigration is a bad thing for Georgia's farmers. Georgia agriculture is the #1 industry for Georgia. 50 to 70%, Senator Saxby Chambliss says, is our undocumented workforce in agriculture.
Do their job. It's a legal way by which they can get the labor they need to do their jobs, and I think that exists. It's in current law, and it's an avenue they can pursue.
I asked Representative Ramsey about how requiring private companies to verify the status of all their employees might impact business in Georgia.
There's going to be a lot of questions about the E-Verify requirement for businesses, and several states have already implemented a mandatory E-Verify for employers in their state, and all of the hysterical claims from some on the some on the other end of the ideological spectrum that I'm on have turned out to be not true. I've enrolled my own law firm in E-Verify. It took me 20 minutes to do it. It takes a matter of seconds once you're enrolled to actually verify an employee, verify their citizenship. So I in no way consider that to be an undue burden on business in the state. And in fact, it's going to help employers protect them from running afoul of federal law and getting themselves in trouble. I think it's a good tool in that regard as well.
And the other chair of the Joint Study Committee on Illegal Immigration, that's Senator Jack Murphy, plans to introduce his version of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Enforcement Act of 2011 in the Senate tomorrow. In other news, the Senate Finance Committee gave passage today to Senate Resolution 20. The constitutional amendment sponsored by Senate Majority Leader Tripp Rogers would cap the amount that the state could spend in prosperous years when there's a budget surplus. We'll have more on that tomorrow. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Wandy Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
Thanks, Wandy. Before I let you go this evening, backing up to Representative Ramsey's bill, one of the most controversial parts of the Arizona law, which this has been described as, is the ability for police officers to examine someone's immigration status without them committing a previous crime. Is that inside this bill? Is that the break point for some people on this?
Well, that is not actually in any of the sections specifically laid out there. But as you know, often the laws, as they're being evaluated by the courts, those are some of the things that the attorneys often will bring up as kind of mitigating factors that arise from legislation like this.
And obviously the E-Verify law, even as applying to local governments, has had some problems. You know, remember the problems they had verifying even the status of workers of the Cobb County Courthouse.
Absolutely. It was a bit embarrassing in that case.
They're going to put some new teeth
officials
in this?
I'm sorry?
They're going to put some new teeth into this, into enforcement?
Well, according to the supporters and those who have been working on the issue, they say that yes, this is going to give law enforcement the tools that it needs and that it is not going to cost the local systems anymore to actually enforce it.
And finally, you spent some quality time with Senate Pro Tem Tommy Williams today, talking about education, and he had some interesting things to say about some technology innovations.
That's true. He said he had been sitting down with the folks from Apple Computer, had some breaking news about some things that might be coming down the pipeline for Georgia, eliminating textbooks perhaps in favor of some of those nice iPads for our students. I'm going to have more on that in our extended interview tomorrow night. That
would be excellent. Thank you very much, Wandy Lawson. Appreciate the update from the state capitol here. The folks at Apple are even trying to replace money now, I think, with iPods and iPads. Well, we're going to talk education this evening. It is a make or break issue for this General Assembly. The governor certainly made it his priority. Our guest, Representative David Casas, Vice Chairman of the House Education Committee, and Marcus Downs with the Georgia Education of Educators will be joining us after this short break. Stay with us. And now to tonight's leadership segment this morning. And Wandy, Actually, we're moving on to our interview section this evening, and it's time to talk a little education this evening. And joining me tonight is a couple of distinguished guests this evening. I've got Representative David Casas with us this evening. He's Vice Chairman of the Education Committee in the House of Representatives. Great to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
And Marcus Downs with the Georgia Association of Educators. Nice to have you with us tonight.
My pleasure.
Can we clear up a little ground thing? Just my colleagues at Talk Radio sometimes refer to the Georgia Association of Educators, another such group, as a teachers' union. Is it a union?
Well, one of the primary differences between GAE, Georgia Association of Educators, and other unions throughout the country is that in Georgia there are no collective bargaining rights. We are affiliated with the nation's largest labor union, the National Education Association. The difference is we don't have the ability to bargain here in Georgia.
Okay, so you're not going in saying teachers have to make X amount or we're walking out?
Well, we're going in and we're advocating for the rights and the benefits of our teachers and hoping that that translates to what we're able to do on behalf of our students. Mm-hmm. So we definitely advocate for our teachers' rights and make sure that they've got due process and fair dismissal and everything that every employee would like to enjoy. But we are not bullies. We're not hardliners. We stand up for the things that every professional deserves.
I'm glad you cleared that up. But you got maybe a feel for how many teachers in Georgia belong to the Georgia Association, the GAE, maybe even percentage-wise?
Approximately 44,000.
44,000. And that would be what percentage do you think?
Of roughly 110,000.
Okay, all right. So right around 35, 40%, somewhere in there. Right. Why don't we start with where we are, Representative Casas. Where does Georgia rank now in K-12 education in the nation?
Well, I think it depends on who you ask, but we're somewhere in the 40s, it seems like, and then there's some that say we're in the upper 30s. And it's always, I guess, graded or judged by our performance on national standardized testing or a different type of instruments in that sense. They also take into consideration maybe our dropout rates or graduation rates in some senses. But it's all over the place. It really depends who you speak to. And it also depends on whether you talk about Georgia as a whole or if you talk about the Metro Atlanta area. Metro Atlanta area schools tend to rank above the national average. We're talking about systems like Gwinnett and Cobb and Fulton, Cherokee, and your metro areas. But when you take the state as a whole, then all of a sudden those numbers change too. So it's all over the spectrum.
So graduation rates, SAT scores, for instance.
That's right.
That's not a great number, is it? I mean, for Georgia. We're near the bottom in SAT scores, aren't we? When you look at the whole state?
Well, one of the things you have to look at is not every state administers the SAT.
That's true.
You may have states like South Dakota, North Dakota that administer the ACT. Many other states are leaning more towards the ACT as the preferred college entrance exam. And so when people say that Georgia consistently ranks in the bottom, you've got to consider that as a factor as well.
And I think you also have to add in that some states are exclusive as to who they will test. Where in Georgia, all students are tested.
Okay, that is level the playing field just a bit. Well, I think every new governor that's come in since I've been old enough to listen, growing up in Griffin, has said, I'm going to fix education. We've got to do something about education. And I'm a product of public schools and a public university. Do we have that big of a problem?
We certainly have our challenges, and I think that anyone who takes leadership of the state has to make fixing education one of their priorities, and from our perspective, we believe that can only be done through a collaborative effort. So that means that you've got to have your policymakers, your decision makers, your David Casases of the world, your GAEs of the world. You've got to have us in the room. You've got to have parents. You've got to have community stakeholders, and every individual who has a stake, who has an interest in seeing Georgia's public schools excel.
Well, we can always do better, but again, obviously, is it an emergency?
I think it should be in the front burner. I think that you always have new students coming to your state. You're continually having new teachers going into the classrooms. You always have new generations that present new problems. And so I believe that education is not zero sum. It's a progressive, continual thing that you have to stay on top of. And you've got to learn new ways of delivering the information, new ways of training the next generation. And certainly if we taught school like in the 1950s in the 21st century, it wouldn't result very far.
Right.
So I think that I can't see any governor coming into office and saying, I'm going to ignore education. I think every governor by de facto is an education governor because education is the responsibility of the state.
Well, there you are, and it is, if anything, it maybe right up there with Medicaid is the biggest budget item when you get right down to it.
Absolutely, education is more than half the budget. So.
And there's something at stake here: K through 12 education, which results in a skilled workforce. That's the definition: a skilled laborer, someone who has a high school diploma. And more I'm hearing from businesses, big businesses, through the chamber and other groups who say that, well, the reason we don't come to Georgia more often is we want a more skilled workforce. Not the corporate income tax, even that would help, but we want a skilled workforce. President Obama, called this one of our Sputnik moments in the nation. He called it the race with the future. And there's other countries that are trying to race ahead of us very, very fast. I don't know how many days in school kids in urban areas of China are in right now, but I'm sure it's over 250. Sure. Is it possible to keep Georgia kids in school 180 days a year now? Either one of you.
I can take a shot at that,
Sure.
and I know Marcus certainly will. I think that the delivery of education and the way that you do it, we have a different culture, we have a different background here. I mean, if you go to Asia, it's just a different type of environment, it's a different type of culture, and they approach education in a very different way. Here we have many ways of delivery, we have many options. I think that the greatest thing that we need to do is to realize that what we're lacking is soft skills. And like you said, many of the businesses say, well, we have a tough time in Georgia because it's not whether the student can do algebra or the student can read, it's that the student doesn't even show up for work or doesn't, half the time is not doing their work and they have difficulty doing those kind of things. And so training our students in those soft skills should be one of the major items or priorities that we should place in education going from here forward.
Of course, teacher furlough days have been a sore point with educators, lawmakers, everyone in between, and they've become an economic necessity. What do you think, Mr. Downs? 180 days a year, is that possible now?
I certainly think so. This is 2011. We're no longer operating in an agrarian economy. Many years ago, children went to school during certain months because they had to harvest during the other months. And because this is 2011, those are no longer concerns. I think one of the issues that we have to contend with, particularly when it comes to having corporations relocate to Georgia, is something that our national affiliate likes to call TEF, which looks at taxes, economic development, and funding for public schools. And if you talk to corporations, many of them will tell you that we don't come because of the corporate tax incentive. We often relocate because we want an educated workforce, because we want to make sure that we can put out a good product, and we've got a great place for us to send our children to school if we relocate to a certain state. And so a lot of people have often misplaced 10-year tax incentives for quality public schools. The quality public schools is what gets corporations to come here, and it's what gets corporations to stay. And one of the other pieces that advances that is when the public school system can demonstrate that they've got staying power. Not just that they can operate 2011, 2012, 2013, but that they can take a corporation perhaps to 2020 and operate on jobs that they don't even exist yet. And so it takes creativity and ingenuity within the public school system in order to be able to reel some of those corporations in.
As far as the state government's concerned, what their responsibilities, you mentioned that just a moment ago. Education really is county by county. These are all independent school systems, right? They raise money with property taxes to fund these local school systems. What should the state's role be here? Now we're talking statewide here. What should the state's role be, Representative Casas?
Well, I think that what we've done over the years is that we have tried to keep the mantra of keep education local, and local government is definitely closer to the people. And I subscribe to that, and I believe that the independent school systems should continue to make the decisions at that local level. However, if you look at it constitutionally, it is the responsibility of the state government to provide a quality education for every child in the state. And from the very beginning, it's been the responsibility of the state. And I believe that the state should be there in a sense, to provide a general guidance as to the direction of what we want to see our future workforce look like, what kind of opportunities we want to offer the children. Marcus mentioned, how public schools not only are a decision maker or as far as corporate relocation, but also when it has to do with housing and mortgages, and a lot of it is determined by the quality of your local school.
Oh, look, check Clayton County after the accreditation problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you see those issues, but we've also found in the 21st century that there is other ways of delivery of education beyond the public school. And so I believe that the state government's primary responsibility should make sure that their citizens are being educated and providing every support possible for the local governments to provide that education.
Do we have a number on per pupil spending statewide? I know it varies county to county, district to district. Is there like a fat number we could talk about? $8,000, $7,000 per student per year, something like that? Does that sound about right? Or?
I believe the average is somewhere between $8,000
Right.
and $9,500.
Okay, and obviously some systems will spend more, some will spend less,
That's
depending
true.
on their resources.
That's right.
Are we getting our money's worth? Backing into that question differently, is there a lot of waste? I mean, could we be spending that money better? We'll start with you, Mr. Downs. What do you think?
Well, I certainly think that in every budget, there's it's necessary to review on a regular basis. But I can tell you, with what we're dealing with in public education now at the K-12 level, there's not a lot of waste. When we talk about furloughs, kids can't learn if they're not in school. Mm-hmm. And that's just the bottom line. And so we'd like to be able to offset furloughs. There are programs that children would be able to advance themselves with, and we need to make sure that those programs are untampered. Now, with the governor's proposal of the new budget, we were very excited to see that the quality basic education component of the budget has not been touched, and we applaud him for that. We want to make sure that we're able to support him as much as possible to make sure that he's successful with what he's proposed. But I can tell you there's not a lot of waste in the K-12 budget as of now. There's a lot of suffering, a lot of belt tightening, and particularly when you look at the classroom level, when teachers run out of paper, they can't just go to the front office and say, I need another pack of paper. Mm-hmm. Chances are what they're doing is they're taking the money out of their own pocket and they're running off to Office Depot right after school to get paper, pens out of their own personal budget, which is also being compromised because of the furloughs, because of the health care. And these are issues that everybody is facing here in Georgia. But to answer your question more directly, I don't believe there's a lot of fat to be trimmed at all.
What do you think, Representative Casas?
And here's a point where we do disagree sometimes. Marcus and I enjoy our debates on this. The fact is that there are good schools in our state and all around that can educate our kids with less of what it's costing to educate them in a public school. And being a public school teacher for 12 years, and I know Marcus has experience in the classroom too, we look around and there is waste. Mm. And you'd have to really micromanage those budgets to really find what some of the things that are going on. And I think that is a responsibility when it comes down to the school level to start finding some efficient ways of delivery. But when you start talking about all the alternatives that we've done, like charter schools, like virtual schooling, like even homeschoolers, they've been able to deliver a quality education, much less than $8,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that although it is important to make sure that we place a priority in our education, whatever it may be, public schools, because that is what the state is mandated to take care of, but in every facet of educating a child, I believe it needs to be a responsibility, and we need to empower the parent to be able to make those choices in that sense and get their money's worth.
There's a lot of heroic teachers out there who are digging in their own pockets, and we all can name them, and we all had them, along the way. But what about top-heavy school systems that are heavy on administrators, that are paying a lot of consultant specialists, and some of those specialists are needed, but I mean, top-heavy administration. I was talking to Governor Deal about this in December before he took office, and he said that worried him. That's right. The AJC is going to pop a story this weekend where some people are very upset with the amount of money that some of the people running the Teachers Retirement Fund are making, better than $500,000 a year apiece. You could argue they're running a huge fund and they deserve that money when you compare it to Wall Street, but I would think $500,000 you could probably hire 10 pretty good teachers. What about the top-heavy issue?
I think that is a very legitimate side of it. I mean, if we started looking into what superintendents are making, especially in some of the metro Atlanta schools, with some of the administrators that are going on, how much they're overfilling. I mean, teachers that are wanting to move on into administration maybe because of the pay. When you look overall, teachers in Georgia, administrators in Georgia, the pay in Georgia is the best in the Southeast. And we're doing very well as far as what we're paying them. Now, anyone would tell you that the three that are underpaid are your firemen, your police officers, and your teachers, and it's because
jobs.
they're in the front line, no doubt. And we need to take care of them. But I think the top heavy is a good point. I mean, half of our budget, of our state budget, is going to education, and it always baffles me. How is it that we have such a large amount of money going into public education, but yet teachers still have to dig into their own pockets to buy materials. We have to ask parents to, after they've paid their school tax on their property, after they've paid income tax, they've got to go to the store and buy more supplies.
Or sell wrapping paper.
Exactly.
Right, sure.
And so there's obviously a blaring question, and I believe Governor Deal agrees with that there is some efficiency that could be achieved.
You agree?
I do. I agree with much of what Representative Casas has indicated.
Yeah. As far as the state government's concerned, and let's move on to that, because this says, after all, primetime lawmakers, and we're going to talk about what you guys can actually do about it in the coming session. The governor has asked for advisory education councils to be set up across the state. What do you hope to learn from them?
After you.
After me. I think that the governor is right on target, because I think he wants to be able to listen. He wants to hear what's going on in each one of these communities, because every school is different. Every community is different. And I believe that what we're going to learn from it, and I think it's going to be the information necessary to be able to take these steps. I think what's happened in the past, not everyone, but generally what's happened is that every governor has walked in and said, I know how to fix education. And very few have taken a step like Governor Deal to say, I'm going to go to the community, find out what's going on, and then let's try to bring some solutions to the table. That's a great approach. Let's find out what's wrong, and then let's fix it. Now, there's obvious things that we need to deal with. And I believe that there's going to be legislation on the way in the next 2 sessions that are going to address some of those issues. But this is a great step on his part, and I believe that this is a great opportunity for teachers, for parents, for administrators, community stakeholders to be able to come and say, Governor, this is what's going on here. We need help.
Okay. You feel good about the tone in the legislature right now?
I do. Over the past several years, organizations like GAE have had a very difficult row to hoe with the governor's office, and I want to take this time to commend Governor Deal on his efforts. What he has done is he's begun to culture a collaborative environment, which is one of the things that educators definitely want. When you've got people who are on the front line every single day, and they're putting it out in the classrooms and on the buses and the cafeteria, they want to know that they have an opportunity to say something and it be heard, and we think this is a very positive step in state government.
Okay, very briefly, just a few seconds left. Do you think we ought to have independent agencies like the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools accrediting school systems?
You're pushing a button there. Everyone has a different opinions as to what regional accreditation agencies, what kind of power they should have, and to come into a state and say you're quality, you're not, is a question. In the last few years, we've seen what an accrediting agency pulling or threatening could do to a community, and I think that this is something that's going to be a debate that we're going to have for quite a few years now.
We'll look forward to that.
Is this really something we should have?
Thanks for your comments. Thanks for both of you joining us this evening. This is a great subject. We're going to talk about it a lot. And coming up tomorrow on Primetime Lawmakers, we'll get to that Tommy Williams leadership interview that we promised you tonight. Senator Tommy Williams is the President Pro Tem of the Senate, plus a panel discussion on the state's water issues. We'll be talking with Senator Ross Tolleson, Chairman of the Senate Natural Resources Committee, and a representative from the Upper Chattahoochee River Keeper, plus the latest Capitol news. That's tomorrow night at 7. See a repeat of this broadcast tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. on GPB. Next on GPB, a viewer favorite, This Old Movie Palace, Fixing the Fox. That's straight ahead. That's our broadcast for the 5th legislative day of the 2011 session. Thanks to both our guests for joining us tonight. For Wandy Lawson and the whole Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. Hope you have a great night.
This is a GPB original production.